Okay, guys, what we have here are some notes and just some little important details that you need to know about the first two chapters in To Kill a Mockingbird. So have a notebook handy to write some of these things down, because there are some terms that you're going to have to make note of. So first of all, we have chapter 1, which, as we discussed in class, kind of sets us up to have a little discussion of time. And so you can see it starts off with this mention of the fact that Jem was nearly 13, all right? And then again, when enough years had gone by to enable us to look back on them. So we know that a lot of this has happened in the past, all right? And we also get, some important information about their ages, all right? So we know, because she says Jem is 4 years her senior, that he's 4 years older than her. And we also note a little bit of background, okay? So in this particular part, we get the background on all of this. A sense of how sophisticated the writing is. So you'll notice that kind of come into play here. This is probably a little bit of a skill jump in terms of the vocabulary. So this is where we are in terms of the plot diagram. We're in the exposition phase. And we're getting all the background information we need to know about the entire story. And now the exposition in this portion of the novel can be broken into 3 parts. We have part 1, the hook, then we have the history, and then we have what's called the narrowing focus. In the hook, we have Harper Lee using a mystery to draw her reader in, okay? So that is this part here, all right? This discussion of Jem's badly broken arm. And we're not going to know exactly how this happened until we get to the end of the book. All right, so maybe like 300 pages in the future, we finally discover the mystery of that broken. We also have the history, okay, and Lee does this very purposely. She uses the town as a character in itself. And like we talked about in the beginning, Lee's discussion of how Southern life kind of plays out was greatly lauded. People absolutely loved her depiction of Southern life, and so the town is a really big deal in this sense. So if you take a look here, all right, this is where the discussion of the town starts, okay? Macomb was an old town, but it was a tired old town when I first knew it. We have a lot of imagery here. Very, very strong sense of the temperature, okay? It was hotter than a black dog suffered on a summer's day. These bony mules flicking flies in the sweltering shade. We have collars that are wilting and ladies with frostings of sweat on them. So we have a nice little piece of language there that she uses to describe how hot it is. In addition to being hot, people are moving very slowly. They amble, they shuffle. The day was 24 hours long, but it seemed a lot longer. All right, everything is very, very, very slow. And we have this very interesting allusion. Macomb County had recently been told that it had nothing to fear but fear itself. So that gives us a sense of also the time period, Great Depression, obviously. And it's at this point that Lee begins to kind of introduce all of the characters besides just Scout. All right. Already we know a little something about Scout. You know, she's the younger child, that she and Jem fight a lot. Now we get an introduction into Calpurnia being all angles and bones. We know that her hand as wide as a bed slat and twice as hard is frequently punishing Jem. They have these epic one-sided battles. Okay, they're one-sided because Calpurnia always won. And it's interesting to note that right after her introduction of Calpurnia, we have a mention of Scout's mother, who is absent. All right, she died when Scout was 2, so Scout never really had any kind of connection with her, unlike Jem, all right, who was 4 years old, so about 6 years old when their mother died, and he misses her very clearly. It also introduces this other character, Dill. And Dill becomes a very important part of the story. He even has a connection to the title of the story. And this is also when Lee starts to narrow the focus into part 1 of the story, okay, which is this obsession with Boo Radley. So Dill, being, you know, this really great storyteller, he tells them the story of Dracula from start to finish, a movie that he saw. He has a very, very obvious active imagination, all right? And he is the one who gave them the idea of making Boo Radley come out. He's fascinated by this place, all right, because it is so decrepit and old, and you can see that there's really, really strong imagery here as to exactly how beat up and old this house is, okay? A low house, it was darkened, all right, rain rotted, meaning that the rain kind of wore away at the shingles. There's very little sun. Picket fence that drunkenly guards the front yard, all right? And inside the house is this malevolent phantom, all right? Meaning that he is unseen, all right? But they know he's bad, or they think he's bad. He gets blamed for all kinds of things. Can't eat the pecans that come from their house because they're poisonous, all right? And it's at this point that we get the whole story of Boo Radley, all right? That the Radleys are a very socially isolated on their own part, not because of anybody else isolating them, but because they choose to be that way. Socially isolated family, with the exception of the younger Radley boy, that's Arthur, who begins to hang out with these Cunninghams. And you'll see these family names kind of pop up again and again, over and over, and the Cunninghams come back around in chapter 2. So he begins hanging out with these Cunninghams, and they get into a little trouble, all right? They do some bad things. And at one point get into so much trouble that they end up getting charged with many crimes, including disorderly conduct, disturbing the peace, assault and battery, and using abusive and profane language in the presence and hearing of a female. So Arthur, Boo, from this very quiet family, you know, kind of gets in trouble, and as you read, he is locked up in the house for the duration. So we then have like the mystery of what he looks like and why and how he stays in that house, okay? And I love this part of the story when Jem gives what Scout describes as a reasonable description of Boo. So that's like a little bit of like tongue-in-cheek kind of dry humor that she has, because obviously Jem has never seen this person, so he has no way of knowing that he's 6.5 feet tall, that there's blood-stained hands, he's eating raw squirrels and cats. This long, jagged scar, nobody knows where it comes from, and the fact that he drools is pretty gross. So Dill kind of, takes this with a grain of salt, and he says, I'd like to see what he looks like. And that's when we're introduced with this storyline of trying to make Boo Radley come out. And, there's an interesting little bet that Jem and Dill get into here over whether or not Jem will touch the Radley house, and of course he does. But that is when we get a little bit of foreshadowing and a building of suspense. All right, so this droopy and sick house, all right, they see an inside shutter move, a flick, a tiny, almost invisible movement, and then the house was still. Lee is very, very skillful at creating a sense of suspense in this case, as seen through the eyes of these children. So we know that somebody inside the house is watching them. The assumption is that it is Boo, but we don't know for sure. Also of import, another little piece of characterization for Dill here is the striking of a match under a turtle being hateful. This isn't the first time we see Dill as very empathetic, all right? Empathetic meaning that he has a strong sense of what others feel and think, all right? So we'll see him as a very empathetic character again later on. Chapter 2 is another intro piece here. It gives us the impression of what kind of schooling that Scout and Jem are what I would call subjected to, as well as it introduces this important motif, and you should write this down. A motif is a recurring element in a story. Now, this can be, when you're talking about motif, you could be talking about symbolism, you can be talking about a certain characteristic, a recurring metaphor even, or simile. It's just something that pops up again and again and again. And motif is important because it's really what the author wants you to see. I mean, we know the power of repetition as we learned about it as a rhetorical device. This is like repetition in fiction, all right? A recurring image, a recurring symbol. It's just something that we see again and again and again. And so when we're looking at chapter 2, one of the big things that we see again and again and again is going to be blindness. Okay, so you're going to see a strong sense in this chapter of exactly how blind Miss Caroline is to the kind of social atmosphere of the town, all right? We know that she's from a different county. She doesn't know much about these Cunninghams, okay? So Scout, kind of enlightens her. And like I said, that the Cunninghams would come back around. And again, you're going to hear stories about these people of the town and the country around the town again and again and again. And that's how the town becomes a character in and of itself, because it has all of these other characters who are so colorful. And so Miss Caroline is blind to this, the social norms of the area, which is that Walter Cunningham is not going to take any kind of charity because that's what he's been taught. And so that's when we have this little story of Atticus talking about how Mr. Cunningham, Walter Cunningham's father, has been getting legal help from Atticus, and he can't pay him with money. So he pays him with little things like firewood or turnip greens, and that is how it works. And it is not, unusual, he says, for this to happen, all right? That Dr. Reynolds works the same way even, okay? He says Dr. Reynolds will frequently take a bushel of potatoes for the delivery of a baby instead of charging the money, because this is the area. It's very rural. This is the Great Depression, and if the farmers aren't making money, then neither are these professionals, like Atticus says. Also of note here is Atticus's feeling that they are poor. And, he's saying that they're not as poor as the Cunninghams, but they are poor nonetheless. And, there's a little bit of wonder here as to what kind of poverty Atticus is talking about. Are they poor in money, or is it something else that they are poor in? So just kind of be thinking about how Atticus as a character is developing, and most of this characterization is coming to us indirectly, okay? We do get descriptions from time to time, but by and large, most of it is an indirect characterization through people's actions or what they are saying. Okay, so that is the little talk that I had prepared for Chapter 2. Be prepared tomorrow to do what we call close reading, picking apart a couple of the little pieces in this section of the book for meaning. And I will see you then. Have a great evening.